So this afternoon, Dr. Junior is going to talk with us a little bit about her personal story of being a black woman who is a biblical scholar and what that journey has been like for her. So as you know, Dr. Junior is a professor of Hebrew Bible at Temple University, and I think that's probably all you need to know about her that you don't already know. So, Dr. Junior.
So thanks everybody for coming. I've seen some of you last night or earlier today in class. What I plan to do is just talk a little bit about my personal journey and how I ended up here, and then leave most of the time for questions. Can you hear me okay?
This will shut up in a moment.
Okay. All right. So let me know if I need to project a bit more. So I went to undergrad at Georgetown, and I remember coming to a session very much like this. There was a scholar who was talking about her work and how she became a specialist in Theravada Buddhism. And what I remember was that she talked about how undergrad, she didn't major in religion, she didn't know anything about Buddhism, but somehow her career through a series of choices had led her to that point. And I don't know what year I was, but I remember thinking at the time, like, every single decision that you make is going to determine your future, and so you must choose the right path, or else this is all for naught and your parents have wasted their money. So I found it really refreshing that someone would say, it's not going to go the way you planned, you're not going to end up where you thought, and you just kind of take it as it comes and see what happens. So that's pretty much what I'm going to say, is that my undergrad major was in international relations, and I don't do anything having to do with that at this point. So those of you who are stressed and anxious about declaring a major or what happens after graduation, I hope that you will take from this some comfort that you don't have to have it all worked out today at this point. I am a biblical scholar at this point in my life. I have a PhD in Old Testament from Princeton Theological Seminary, and I attend and participate in the Society of Biblical Literature, which I mentioned in class earlier today, which is the scholarly organization where the other people who do what I do gather together. But my journey is about more than my CV. So how I ended up here really doesn't start with the usual where I went to school and what I majored in and what I publish, but really with the other people who helped to get me to this point. When I was a little girl, I grew up in the South, and so that meant I had chores. And in our family, you were not paid for chores because you live here. So this is not extra, this is the work that you do as a member of the household. And I don't mean just like taking out the trash or loading the dishwasher. For us, chores meant real chores. My mother is a nurse and my grandfather was in the Navy. So that means at any point in time you could perhaps do surgery on my mother's kitchen floor without any concern about germs or contamination. You had to make the bed with hospital corners, you had to sweep, you had to mop, you had to dust, and not just dust around things, but like move the things and dust in front of, behind, underneath. You had to move the bookcase if necessary, that kind of household. When my mother said wash the dishes, what she really meant was clean the kitchen. So if you wash the dishes, you don't just wash the dishes. You clear the plates, wash the dishes, dry the dishes, put the dishes away, wipe down all the counters, sweep, mop if necessary. If my mother walked by and you were washing dishes and she didn't see steam coming from the dishpan, She would come around me, and I was smaller, so she would come around me and let all the water out. And then I would have to take all the dishes that I thought were clean and rewash everything. Because if the water wasn't hot enough, then obviously the dishes were not clean enough, at least to her standard. I was then, and I'm still, a bookworm, as I mentioned last night. And I really hated having to do chores because I really would just rather read. I can remember summer afternoons with the box fan blowing, and as a preteen, I would be hanging off the corduroy couch. It was the 70s. There was lots of corduroy, lots of naugahyde, lots of shag carpeting. It was not a good time. The angry whir of the vacuum would intrude upon the quiet of my small kingdom, and I would sigh very quietly, because in our household, even a sigh could be a sign of insubordination, and that you did not want. So I would try to quickly finish what I was reading before my mother yelled for me to get up and do something, but once in a while, she wouldn't call me. Once in a while, she would just vacuum around me, and I'd pick up my feet to sprawl out further on the couch, and she'd let me continue reading. After I grew up, I realized how many people played a role in nurturing me. To raise a smart black girl in the South with her soul intact was in fact a very difficult job. My mother and father and my extended family and my church family and my neighborhood all conspired to create an environment that protected me. They worked to affirm my gifts, but also to teach me humility. They could somehow manage to come up with a deposit when money was tight. They could somehow manage to give me a chance for college for what they didn't have. They could somehow manage to get me in the front door when they had to go around back. I took piano lessons from the local piano teacher, and he made it a point to note that when my aunt had taken piano lessons with him, she had to go in the back door. But things had changed so much, so I was allowed to come in the front. My parents somehow made sure that I had a passport, although they didn't. And even once they could no longer double check my homework, they made sure that I had it done. I worked really hard. Believe me, I worked hard. But it was someone else who made sure that my shoes were polished. Somebody else made sure that my dress was ironed, that my hair was combed, that I had train fare. A community of people surrounded me so that I could at least get my foot in the door. As an adult, I found out that, unbeknownst to me, there had been behind closed doors negotiations to make sure that I went on the school trip, to make sure that I went on the study abroad program, to make sure that I got to college up north. That's what they called it, up north. They raised me for a life that they couldn't themselves imagine. You train up a child in the way she should go, and then you release her into the wild. Where I grew up, even wealthy white parents often did not send their kids away to school. I was in Florida, and most kids went to FAMU or University of Florida or Florida State. To leave the state and to go to some place they hadn't heard of except for a basketball team was kind of extraordinary. But more than that was the fact that my parents let me go. I remember asking my parents, because I was an only child and familiar with our situation, and I said, well, how much can we afford? Like, tell me what's reasonable, and I'll try and figure out, like, what school I can go to. And I remember my mother looked at me, and she said, you get in. Let us worry about paying for it. My parents and my family paid a very high price to make sure that I have the life that I lead, which is largely a life of the mind. As an adult, I associate the life of the mind with Sherlock Holmes, kind of 19th century gentleman, not the new Sherlock with the phone, like the new BBC guy. I think of white men wearing tuxedos, sitting in leather chairs at a gentleman's club, a life unencumbered by frivolous concerns like women and children, a perpetual state of leisure, intellectual pursuits followed by card games and cigars. The great man focused with his attention on the documentary hypothesis, or perhaps his butterfly collection, or other things that he has stolen from Africa. There were systems of support to permit him the time and space and the quiet to do his work. There were wives and servants and secretaries. This was back when secretaries were men, even. All of those people toiled in the background, and an invisible hand guided economic markets, and somehow also cleaned clothes, prepared food, and poured sherry. Only when absolutely necessary would one even have to call for assistance, and then a shout to Mrs. Hudson or Bates or someone, and the servant would remedy the situation. There was no acknowledgement of the price paid for the activity by others who worked to create the conditions for the life of the mind. Things have changed somewhat. I doubt even the white guys I know wear tuxedos to dinner. Still, the life of the mind as an individual pursuit persists in academia. When you think about a professor, that person is probably somebody with a beard and like a big jacket with some leather patches on the elbows, perhaps a cigar or something like that. If you do a Google search of professor, you get a lot of professors from movies who again usually have a beard and a cigar, maybe a pipe, usually chasing around a graduate student or perhaps a secretary in what today we would consider sexual harassment, but then what would be considered a job perk. Somehow I have managed to join the community of scholars, and in some respects I'm a successful academic. I have a tenure-track position, I've published a book, I'm working on a second and a third. It may seem like I fit this model of a life of the mind. I don't, on the surface, appear terribly radical or militant. I have a little something put away in my retirement. But as the old preachers would say, I don't look like what I've been through. I had no idea that I would become a biblical scholar. Like many of my ancestors, I fled the Deep South and migrated to the North, although there are arguments about whether DC really constitutes the North or not. I was glad to be a student rather than someone who had to work. I spent my junior summer studying in France, and although I finished my French exams with flying colors, I returned to the U.S. with a greater interest in domestic policy instead of foreign policy. I then went to the Woodrow Wilson School at Princeton in order to focus on domestic policy, and after graduating with my master's, I worked in healthcare. I worked for a while. It was awful. There's no spring break. This was difficult for me to deal with because I'd been in school settings my entire life. So I couldn't believe that you just had to keep going to work every day except the days that you had vacation. I decided to do my MDiv at Pacific School of Religion because I felt a call to ministry. I didn't have any other words to describe what I wanted to do, but I knew that I was tired of just regular work. My grandmother had passed away. I basically had sort of a quarter-life crisis. And I thought I could either just wait 20 years and retire and go back to school, or I could just make the decision then, before I had a mortgage and kids and other responsibilities. So I decided to do my MDiv, and my first class was Introduction to the Hebrew Bible. And I immediately fell in love, and the person who taught the class became my advisor and sent me then to a PhD program at Princeton Seminary. After Princeton, which I don't talk much about, I will just say, trauma would be the best way to describe it. It was studying what I wanted to study, but it was extraordinarily difficult. Not just academically, but there's a reason they call the Presbyterians the frozen chosen. Coming from California at Berkeley, where people would introduce themselves and their HIV status upon first meeting you, to New Jersey, where people made all sorts of assumptions about your life and your sexuality and your gender, was a huge culture shock for me. Although I was studying what I wanted to study, I knew that I had to study all of that and master it in order to study what I wanted to. So I knew that it was going to be a two-step process, and it was. I was hired at University of Dayton when I was ABD, which means all but dissertation. So I finished the requirements of my program, except the dissertation, and I had a new job. I do not recommend that. I certainly needed a job, but to do that and finish my program was awful. So I managed to finish. Dayton was a Catholic school. I was working there in the religious studies department. And at one point, my department chair said, listen, since you're not a man or white or a priest or even Catholic, this is going to be a difficult environment for you. And it was. I left there and then went to Howard University, where I worked at the School of Divinity. And there I was teaching mostly MDiv students who were largely older. I worked there for a while, and then now I'm at Temple University, which is a public research university, and I teach in the Department of Religion. It's more of an old school kind of comparative religion department, but I teach Hebrew Bible there. What I would say is, for me, the PhD was a way for me to get to what I wanted, which was to be able to teach. That was fundamentally what I wanted to do, was to teach people. But along the way, it was also important for me to decide what kind of scholar I wanted to be. And did I simply want to live the life of the mind? Did I simply want to add lines to my CV and publish books and put them on the shelf and not have anyone read them, and also not really care? For me, I decided that I wanted to be a scholar in the best of the lift as you climb tradition. I made a choice to acknowledge that I'm a Black Southern woman, and I bring all of that with me to my research and teaching. My choice to be faithful to my calling, as I understood it, was to be a teacher who teaches in different locations. So I teach in my classroom, I teach in places like this. I also feel that my teaching extends to my social media presence. My choice to do these things means that some of what I do doesn't appear on my CV, which is important academic currency. It means that a lot of the things I do don't count towards tenure and promotion, which is what you need for job security in the academic world. A lot of what I do, there's no applause for it, there's no money in it, there are no prizes or awards. My actions won't be profiled in the campus newsletter. Committed to the struggle is not exactly something you put on your business cards. The academic space is not a welcoming one for me as a Black woman. I am assaulted daily with microaggressions. People assume that I am staff. People assume that I'm a student. Even at a professional conference, I will be professionally attired with my hair done, my makeup done, a little conference name badge, the conference tote bag. I am clearly there as a member of the conference. And yet, if I stand too close to the escalator, someone will ask me for directions. Someone will ask me what time is checkout. Someone will ask me how to get a taxi. Because they assume that I work at the hotel. When I tell people this story, they just are shocked because how could this happen in America in 2017? It has never happened to them, and they can't see how it would happen to anyone else. But these are just some of the basic things that I deal with. One of the most fantastic moments of any new faculty member is when you get your new faculty ID. It's a tangible sign of the new access that is granted to you. It means you can get entrance into buildings and dorms and rooms, and most importantly, faculty library privileges. For me, the new ID at Temple means, as Anna Julia Cooper wrote, only the Black woman can say when and where I enter, and the quiet, undisputed dignity of my womanhood, without violence and without suing or special patronage. Then and there, the whole Negro race enters with me. I am still often the only or the first like me to enter into certain rooms, and that is a privilege that I take seriously. Academia is not a meritocracy, and I did not arrive here solely on my own merits. I have not paid full freight for my ticket. As I enter into a classroom or a faculty meeting or a conference panel, there are others with me, and I hope to pave the way for still others. Thank you. So we have time for questions. I know that's kind of all over the place, but you in the back, yes?
I know you grew up in the African Methodist Episcopal Church, so could you tell us a little bit about what church culture was like growing up as a Black woman in the South?
So the question was about church culture in the AME church, work?
Culture.
Yes,
Church culture, yeah.
that was the church culture,
Okay.
work, go to work, do work. I don't understand this like church shopping thing that people do now, or like churches that have all kinds of amenities and stuff. Like we had none of that. We were the amenities. I grew up in a family church where there were like 3 or 4 families. Each family had like a dozen kids and a million cousins. And so like we went to the church on Saturday, not for a special program, but you need to cut the grass. Somebody needs to dust, somebody needs to vacuum, somebody needs to clean the bathroom. On Sunday, church was work. Like me and all my cousins sang in the choir or played the piano. My uncles, usually it was uncles, were in the pulpit. Like church was service. Church is what you do. It is not a place where you go and relax. It's not like what can the church do for you. It's we are here to work. So during the time I was growing up, women started to play a more prominent role in formal positions. So women started being like labeled as evangelists, as ministers, and then later women were getting ordained in the church. But that wasn't like a big deal. It just sort of was a natural progression that happened. Yes?
If I recall from your talk last night, you said you were originally going to be ordained, right? And I was wondering if there was a moment, you said there was a general idea of why you decided not to, but was there a moment where you went, okay, this isn't going to work out?
Sure, so the question was about ordination. I started my MDiv thinking I wanted to be ordained, but part of it was I didn't know anything else. In my community, if you felt that you were called, then you had to say, I'm called to ministry to be ordained. There weren't other options or other pathways. So part of doing the MDiv was me feeling, the language I would have used at the time was like, this is a way to be faithful to my calling, but I was also thinking, there's got to be a way to get out of this. So I didn't feel that I had the temperament to be a pastor. I'm an only child. I'm an introvert. I don't like people. I don't want to talk to people most of the time. I know you're like, you're a professor, don't you talk all the time? I do, but it drains me. Like after this, I'm gonna collapse. I know some people who are extroverts who like feed on energy and who like crowds and applause and that kind of thing. I just didn't think I was going to be a good pastor. Like pastoral care is not what comes to mind when you think of me. So once I got to my MDiv and decided I wanted to be an academic, for me that meant, okay, this is a way that I can still be faithful to my calling and not be a pastor. Okay, I'm out. Never mind. Didn't really want to do it in the first place. So now I have another route to take.
While you were like studying, like, you know, like going through school and everything, did you ever have issues like with other students, like displaying aggression towards you because of the route you were taking or anything like that? I don't know if that makes sense.
Like in the MDiv?
Yeah, well, like throughout all of your like college career and everything, like.
So the question is about aggression during my college career. I would say at Georgetown, I was just so delighted because I was not the biggest nerd. I wasn't the only black nerd. There were not a lot of us, but I wasn't the only one. So I really was delighted to be at a place with other smart, enthusiastic black folks. Like that was great. At Princeton, we were all suffering so much. It was just equal opportunity suffering, everybody all together. In my MDiv, there was a divide between people who were taking the academic track and people who were not. It wasn't as competitive an environment as it is in some seminaries, but it definitely meant that I was taking different classes and had a different mindset than people who were planning to do pastoral ministry. And in the PhD program, I've never been in the military, but it's sort of like we are veterans who served in the war together. So, yeah, we were in the trenches together, and we became fast friends because that was the only way to survive the program. So it doesn't even matter if I like you or don't like you. If you do this section, I'll do this section, and we'll both be prepared for class tomorrow. But feelings has nothing to do with it. I just need to survive another day in this program. As a faculty member, there are different ways that academics can be passive aggressive. We're very skilled at these kinds of games, unfortunately. So different issues show up in different ways. My experience as a faculty member at Temple has been positive, but our department includes a lot of different kinds of people, and there's not a whole lot of interaction. My experience as a member of SBL is mixed. As I said, like there are some people who think I'm hotel staff. There are others who appreciate and support my work, and then there are others who have issues with me and or my work. So I think, like any workplace, there are always issues. Yes.
Yeah, so I'm really interested in what you mentioned about your experience in Princeton and it being traumatic. I'm just wondering, how did you make it to what kept you going during I cannot imagine what it was really like or what exactly the hardship was. But when you say it was the academics, but I'm sure maybe there was more to that. You just elaborate what kept you going.
Okay, so the question was surviving the trauma that is Princeton Theological Seminary. I mean, it was hard because doctoral programs are hard. It was hard because it was New Jersey. It was hard because it was cold. It was hard because the program is not set up for people like me. The program is set up, I mean, most of academia is set up for a white guy who has support and resources. So it's almost an expectation, it's very old school, but the expectation would be like, you're a young, up and coming whippersnapper, your wife is a nurse or a school teacher, which is good because she can get a job anywhere, right? Your dad was an academic and you knew this was the path you wanted to take. You have family money, you can afford to go to conferences, you understand middle class behaviors and socialization, and you will follow the path that is set before you. Yeah, my people were like, get a what? This is like more school. Why do you study the Bible? Like, you need the Holy Ghost. That will give you the interpretation. What do you, like, how, what do you mean study? That doesn't make any sense, to study the Bible. So that's very different than some of my colleagues who were not only not first generation academics, but not even first generation biblical scholars. So at least two of my colleagues had fathers who had PhDs in biblical studies. Very different experience. It was trauma because you have to study a whole lot of stuff that you might not be interested in order to get to the stuff that you are interested in. So a lot of academia is about proving that you've got the chops. So when they bestow the degree upon you, I don't like to say give, because trust me, they didn't give it to me. But when you receive the degree, it means like you have their good housekeeping seal of approval. And they're gonna make sure you work for it. So it was hard in a lot of ways. I'll put it like this. I give money to Georgetown and Princeton and Pacific School of Religion. I have never given a dime to PTX. Yeah.
Sorry, the other part of the question was how did
Oh, and the getting over. Yes.
How did you
Oh,
get there?
yes. Okay. Yes, I fixate on the trauma sometimes. Yes. How did I manage to survive? Part of it was I knew why I was there. Like, I need this degree in order to do what I want. So I'm going to do whatever I have to do to get this degree. The other part was my colleagues. So the other students who were part of the cohort, the people who came in with me, as I said, it was like we are in the trenches together. So I'm trying to get out of here and so are you. We're going to help each other. Just determination. And part of it was coming from my background as a black girl in the South. I mean, my folks, I don't recommend this as a parenting strategy, but my family was pro-education and whatever that took. So, like, there was no complaining about school. My family was just like, you better get your lesson. So, I mean, it didn't matter if, like, Bull Connor is standing in front of the schoolhouse. Yeah, well, you better get your lesson. Was the teacher there? Well, you better get your lesson. I don't know what you were doing. Like, why were you not getting your lesson? Because that's what we sent you to school for. My parents both went to segregated schools that were later integrated. And I don't think I don't think that generation of black parents in the US understands the price paid by the kids who went to the desegregated schools. Like, I don't think that my parents can fathom what it was like to be at a school and you're the only one who looks like you. Both of them went to schools where everybody looks like you, all your teachers live in the same neighborhood, everybody knows everybody. It's not, you weren't being bussed in. Not that segregated schools was a good thing, but what they were interested in was access, not integration. So I feel that educationally, I have been the only one or one of few in nearly every classroom I've been part of. And the getting through is, this is what you do. If this is what it takes for me to get the education that I need, then this is what I'll do. Yes.
I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how being a black woman in biblical studies has informed your work in positive ways. Does it enable you to do kinds of work that other biblical scholars are not able to do?
Yeah, I do tend to focus on the negative. Okay, so the positives. I don't really think of it as positive. It's just who I am. I think informed by feminist and womanist criticism, I'm more upfront about my agenda in reading or my scholarship. I'm willing to talk about why I do the work that I do. I think lots of times, especially white male scholars, just start with, okay, and this is the scholarship. You don't need to know anything about me. I do feel that making the decision to do that has helped me in my work, and I do think that the feedback that I get from people is that it's something that they appreciate that I'm honest and forthright about why I do what I do and what some of my influences are. But I'm also aware that it is possible that the people who are reviewing me for tenure and promotion may not find those to be positive things and may have concerns about the kind of scholarship that I do and may feel that my traveling to do things like this, that my social media engagement is all like a waste of time and not real scholarship. So even for the positives, I realize I'm taking a risk. And it's possible that all the stuff I do that's not on my CV may be regarded as problematic.
Advanced you're learning, say, on a daily basis as you're teaching, what are you reading? How are you still writing? Like, what does it look like besides teaching, or how do you incorporate your writing to the content?
So the question was about writing and teaching and what else you do. I know students must think that faculty mostly teach because that's where you see us, but the teaching is really a very small percentage of our time. Most of our time, well, a lot of our time is in meetings that we don't want to be in. But beyond meetings and committee work, a lot of it is prep for class, prepping exams, prepping materials, doing research, writing for articles and books. My daily life is mostly reading and writing in some sort of fashion. That might be for a journal article, it might be for a blog post, it might be something on social media, but most of my life is me in front of some sort of screen or behind a book, which in some ways is what I wanted as the life of the mind. Too much of that is spent with email, but I do overall feel very fortunate that I get to do what I do, and I'm not punching a clock. I'm in charge of my own time. Never tell faculty they have summers off. We don't have them off. But I'm grateful that I have summers that I'm free to do the work that I want to do. So for me, I'm happy with the choices that I made. I'm glad that I do what I do. It's not a life I recommend to other people, but I'm happy about the choices that I made and where I am.
You've talked a lot about Princeton. What led you to going there? Like, why did you choose that school compared to other community schools?
So why did I go to PTS? So my advisor, Jeffrey Kwan, where I did my MDiv, would only write letters of recommendation for me for 2 schools, Emory and PTS. And I said, well, most people apply to like 5 or 6 or 10 PhD programs. And he said, well, you're getting 2 letters. You only need 1 acceptance. So good luck with that. For him, he felt that those were the 2 places that he knew other faculty and thought that I would be well educated. I won't say taken care of, but I would get what I needed in terms of my education. So I got into both. I chose to go to PTS because they had lots of faculty in Hebrew Bible, and I wasn't exactly sure what I wanted to do, but I knew that someone there would be able to help me put together a committee. So that's why I went there.
You don't have to answer this question at all, but how has getting married changed your career at all? I know he's also a scholar, so that has its ups and downs, but I'm just curious.
Sure. So I'm married to another academic who also is a Hebrew Bible scholar. It hasn't really changed much, but I realize it's probably a very weird life to other people. So we have no work-life balance. That's not healthy. That's not good. I'm just telling you. Everything overlaps. We try to say, well, let's not talk about work. That doesn't work because that's all we do. So it is nice to have an in-house editor. Like, we edit each other's work, we look at each other's stuff, we bounce ideas off of each other. We share books. That is, in fact, one of the main reasons why our relationship will stand the test of time, because we have commingled our libraries. And somebody would have to die over the books. So yes, we will be together forever, or he will have to go without the books. I have a friend who's a scholar who's married to someone who's not a scholar, and I realized that they just have very different conversations. So they talk about their kid, and they talk about world events, and they talk about the news, and I was like, but what about your work? Like, how do you not? It just seemed very bizarre to me. So he would talk to me about his new project, but not her, because she's not in the field. So for us, we talk about everything and all the time. for us it's normal. I don't know what other couples do, but we read and write and work, and yeah, it's great. I'm a bookworm with another bookworm. We're happy.
You kept mentioning something like living the life of the mind, and I kind of got a hint that you were describing it, but I want you to just explain to me like more what you mean by living the life of the mind.
Sure. So the question is about the life of the mind. I think when people talk about the life of the mind, they mean being an academic in an ivory tower, someone who does research who doesn't have any practical skills, kind of a stereotype of the absent-minded professor, someone who just lives in a library, who's probably unkempt, scruffy looking, but considered brilliant. So what I was talking about is kind of that stereotype of a brilliant white guy who cannot be bothered to shine his shoes or comb his hair or show up on time because he's so brilliant. And for me, the process was of wanting to be a scholar and not having role models and having to figure out, I do want this life of the mind, but I'm not going to do that separated from the community that created me. I do want a life of the mind, but I don't want to write books just for other scholars. I do want to engage other people. So it's been a process of making it up as I go along. I didn't plan to have the social media presence that I do, but the way that I engage on social media, people liked and appreciated, and has led to more social media work. I wanted to share some of the insights that I have as a scholar and relate those to contemporary issues. So that has meant writing for BuzzFeed, writing for the Washington Post, writing for popular outlets. My teachers don't do those kinds of things, and most academics I know don't do those kinds of things. So part of becoming a scholar for me was making choices to say, I see how other people do it, I see kind of what other people think you're supposed to do, but I'm going to do this a different way. I realize I'm taking a little bit of a risk here, but this is the way that I'm going to be a scholar in the world. I will say the risk is real. I won't get into the details, but basically I replied to a tweet from the ACLU, and my tweet ended up on Tucker Carlson. I was invited to be on the show. I politely declined. But that then got picked up by Breitbart and other right-wing media, and my Twitter feed blew up. People were emailing my personal email, my work email. You should not be a professor. Temple should not have hired you. You have no business being a professor. Die, you blank, 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 blank. It got to the point that I had to contact campus security. So there are risks. I would not have this if I just sat quietly in my library and wrote things only for other scholars. But for me, in part due to my background, due to my extended family, due to this tradition of service, this is the choice I've made, and this is how I've decided to be a scholar. Let me see if there's anybody else before I take a question. Yes.
So would you say that your approach to scholarship and taking it out and showing it to people who aren't as well or as much trained, do you think that that is the way the scholars should approach being scholars, or like do you think that should be like a shift in how this is done?
So the question is about, do I think other scholars should do more public-facing scholarship is what we would call it. It's not something I would recommend. First of all, it is risky. If your institution and your department don't think that these are things that you should be doing, there could be negative consequences for your career. There have been scholars who have tweeted something that was maybe innocuous, maybe a little bit offensive, or maybe just provocative, who have lost their jobs. So I think it's fine for people to say, you know, more scholars should be doing more accessible scholarship and be in the community. But you have to understand that our institutions don't back us up in that. My institution, the only thing they did for me when I brought this Tucker Carlson thing to their attention was, oh yeah, you should file a report. If you get in trouble for those kinds of things, your institution is going to say, yeah, you might need to get a lawyer. It doesn't mean that they're going to provide legal services for me, or protection for me, or a bodyguard, or witness protection, whatever. So I think it's easy to say scholars should be doing more work in the community, but there's very little support for scholars doing that. So again, it's a choice that I've made. I also realize I'm in a pretty good position. I do have a tenure track position. I am married. I have health insurance. For somebody who's an adjunct, so someone without a contract at a university, one tweet could mean that you don't get asked back to teach next semester. And that could mean very negative consequences for your family.
So if your kind of life of the mind is really more like a life of minds and engaging minds, do you think there is a way you could have attempted to pull off that stuck in a quarter, brilliant scholar writing for others? Did that ever occur to you to try for that? Or do you feel as if that would not be honoring, what was the term you used earlier? It was honoring your calling?
Right, calling. So the question was, could I have done it the other way? Probably not. I mean, I am making this up as I go. I don't know another way to do it. I think the traditional scholarship thing never appealed to me. So this is the way that I'm choosing to do it. Again, it's not something I recommend. It's just a product of who I am and my environment and the influences that shaped me. So this is a series of decisions, a series of choices on a very windy road that led me to this point. Yes?
So what kinds of goals do you hope to achieve by bringing this biblical scholarship into a more public social media format?
So what are my goals in all of this more accessible stuff? I think one of the things that I try to do is to offer a different image of what scholarship is and what a professor is. So I realized that I had very few black women professors in my life. I've had 2. I've been in school for decades, and out of all that time, there've only been 2. So one is to provide a different image of what scholarship is and what it looks like. It's also to talk about the relevance of biblical texts, that these are still texts that people quote, that politicians use in speeches, that people use to manipulate people. And so it's important that you have people who study these texts to comment about its use in the public square. And then also maybe just a little bit of encouragement for some other little black girl who's a bookworm, that there are other ways, there are other paths. It was supposed to be a sermon, it wasn't really. I did a talk at a church at 11 o'clock. They called it a sermon. That wasn't what I was doing. And someone wrote me an email afterwards and said, she had gotten to church late and I'm short. So the pulpit was so, like the podium was so big that if you're sitting back, you can't see me because I was in the big chair at the church. So she couldn't see who was going to be delivering the sermon. And then, it's time, so I stood up and she was like, who is this? What are we doing today? I had no idea. And in the email she talked about, and basically she didn't remember anything that I said. She was more just so happy to see a black woman in that space at that time. And I wasn't doing any of the preacher tricks. So I wasn't like kicking off my shoes like Patti LaBelle. I wasn't, waving a white handkerchief. I wasn't hooping. I wasn't yelling. And she was letting me know that she appreciated not only what I was talking about, but my presence. And it's one of the things that I realize I kind of take for granted, but is probably almost as important as what I say, is the fact that I'm in the room, the fact that I am who I am, and that I book the way that I do.
So, friends, I think our time is upon us. So thank you all for being here, and let's thank Dr. Junior.